Good evening. Tonight, we are going to spend some time in the gentle English countryside, where the fields roll softly beneath the fading light, where ancient hedgerows stretch between meadows, and where the quiet lives of small creatures unfold beneath the evening sky. As you listen, allow yourself to settle comfortably. There is nowhere else to be, and nothing you need to do. For now, simply imagine a peaceful summer evening. The sun has almost disappeared beyond the distant hills. Golden light still lingers across the tops of the grasses, but the shadows are beginning to lengthen. The warmth of the day remains in the earth, stored among roots and stones and patches of dry soil beneath the hedges. And beneath one such hedge, tucked safely beneath the tangled branches of a hawthorn bush, a hedgehog begins to wake. For most of the day, he has been asleep. His nest is simple but comfortable. Dry leaves form a soft blanket around him. Twigs and grasses create a sheltered little chamber hidden from view. Above him, the thorny branches of the hawthorn hedge offer protection from the weather and from the eyes of larger animals passing nearby. For a few moments he remains still. The countryside around him is changing from day to night. A blackbird sings one final song from a distant treetop. A wood pigeon calls softly somewhere across the fields. The breeze moves through the hedgerow with a gentle rustle, stirring leaves that have basked in sunlight since morning. The hedgehog lifts his nose. The air carries many scents, the rich smell of damp earth, the faint sweetness of wildflowers, the green scent of grass cooling after a warm day, and somewhere nearby the smell of fresh rain that fell earlier that afternoon, leaving tiny droplets hidden beneath leaves and petals. He sniffs again. All hedgehogs rely heavily upon their sense of smell. Their eyesight is not particularly strong, especially compared with many other animals, but their noses help them understand the world around them. And this evening, his nose tells him something interesting. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, simply different. The night feels inviting. Perhaps it is the gentle breeze, perhaps it is the comfortable warmth lingering in the soil. Or perhaps it is simply one of those evenings that seem to encourage wandering. Slowly, the hedgehog stretches, his small legs extend beneath him. His nose twitches, one paw emerges from the nest, then another. Finally, he shuffles forward until he reaches the entrance of his leafy shelter. The countryside is waiting. Above him, the sky glows with fading shades of gold and pale blue. A few wisps of cloud drift lazily overhead. The first evening stars haven't yet appeared, but the daylight is growing softer with every passing minute. The hedgehog pauses. He is in no hurry. Night belongs to creatures like him. While many animals are preparing to sleep, he is only just beginning his day. This is true for hedgehogs throughout Britain. They spend much of the daylight hours resting safely in nests beneath hedges, sheds, bushes, or piles of leaves, emerging in the evening to explore forage and travel through the countryside. Travel is something hedgehogs do surprisingly well. Though they seem slow and unhurried, they can wander considerable distances during a single night, moving through gardens, fields, woodland edges, and winding hedgerows. The little hedgehog gazes out across the landscape. Beyond his hedge lies a patchwork of meadows and farmland. Tall grasses sway gently in the breeze. Buttercups nod sleepily among the stems. Far away, a tractor hums faintly before falling silent. The working day is ending. For several moments, the hedgehog simply listens. The countryside has its own rhythm. Daytime sounds fade, nighttime sounds begin. A robin sings briefly before becoming quiet. The rustling of grasses grows more noticeable. Tiny insects buzz among the last warm pockets of air. Everything seems softer, calmer, more relaxed. The hedgehog takes a few cautious steps from beneath the hawthorn hedge. The earth beneath his feet is pleasantly cool. A fallen leaf shifts quietly as he passes. A beetle scurries beneath a stone. The breeze brushes gently through his spines. Many people imagine hedgehog spines as stiff and uncomfortable, but they are simply modified hairs made from keratin, the same material found in human fingernails. They help protect the hedgehog while still allowing him to move through the world with surprising ease. Tonight, however, protection is the furthest thing from his mind. The countryside feels peaceful, welcoming, filled with possibilities. He pauses once more and looks along the length of the old hedge that stretches away into the distance. Usually he follows familiar paths. Usually he visits familiar places, but this evening feels different. Not because anything important has changed, not because there is a problem to solve, only because the cool evening breeze seems to whisper a quiet invitation. Perhaps tonight he might wander a little farther. Perhaps he might discover a corner of the countryside he has never visited before. The thought settles gently in his mind, and with the last warmth of the day fading into the evening air, the little hedgehog begins his journey. The hedgehog moves slowly now, leaving the shelter of his hawthorn hedge behind. The evening has deepened slightly. The warm gold of sunset has faded into softer tones, pale amber near the horizon and a gentle blue beginning to settle above the fields. Up ahead of him runs the hedgerow. It's older than it looks. Not old in the sense of crumbling or broken, but old in the way living things become when they are left to grow and shift naturally over time. Hawthorn, bramble, blackthorn and elder weave together into a dense, tangled line that separates one field from another. Roots twist beneath the soil, branches overlap and reconnect, birds nest within it, insects shelter within its depths, and small mammals, like the hedgehog, use it as a pathway between different parts of the countryside. To many creatures, a hedgerow is not a boundary at all. It's a road, a quiet, living road. The hedgehog steps onto it without hesitation. The ground here is uneven. Soft patches of earth alternate with small clusters of leaves and twigs. Occasionally a stone interrupts the soil, warmed earlier by the sun and now slowly releasing that heat back into the cooling air. He pauses often, sniffs, listens. The countryside at night is never silent. Even in stillness, there is movement, the faint rustle of something small shifting through grass, the distant call of an owl testing the air, the almost inaudible hum of insects continuing their endless work. The hedgehog continues along the hedge, and after a few moments he finds something unusual. It's caught on a thorn, halfway up a blackthorn branch, a feather. At first glance, it seems ordinary, pale at the base, darker toward the tip, slightly curved as though shaped by flight. But it's not where one would expect to find it. It is too neatly placed, too carefully caught between the thorns, as if it had been set there rather than left by chance. The hedgehog stops beneath it. He cannot understand it in the way humans might, but he recognizes its presence as something that doesn't belong to the usual rhythm of the hedgerow. Birds lose feathers often, that's natural, but owls in particular are not often seen during the day. They are creatures of night and silence, and their presence is usually known only by sound, a distant call, or the sudden quieting of smaller animals in their wake. This feather, however, carries that feeling, stillness, softness, predatory calm. The hedgehog sniffs beneath it, but finds nothing to suggest danger, only the lingering scent of another creature passing through earlier in the night, or perhaps even the previous night. He continues on. The hedgerow bends slightly now, following the contour of the land. The fields on either side dip gently, creating shallow valleys where mist tends to gather in colder months. Tonight, there is no mist, only the slow cooling of air and the quiet shift from evening into night. After a short distance, the hedgehog comes across another sign. This one is closer to the ground, tiny impressions in the soft mud at the base of the hedge, tracks They are small and scattered, leading in no clear direction. Some disappear beneath fallen leaves. Others fade where the soil is too dry to hold their shape properly. The hedgehog pauses again. He doesn't know what made them in any human sense, but he understands movement. All creatures do. Movement leaves traces, even when the creature itself is gone. These tracks suggest something small, light, quick, possibly a mouse or a young rabbit moving along the hedge line during the earlier hours of the night. The hedgehog lowers his nose to the ground and investigates. The scent is faint, layered over by the smells of soil, plant roots, and damp vegetation. Nothing urgent, nothing threatening, just life passing through. He moves on. The hedgerow grows slightly denser here. Bramble shoots extend outward in tangled arcs, some still holding the last remnants of summer berries, dark and heavy, slowly softening as they ripen beyond their peak. A few have fallen to the ground, where beetles and ants have already begun their quiet work. The hedgehog stops briefly at one such patch, sniffing, but finds nothing particularly interesting. He is not driven by hunger alone tonight. There is something else guiding his attention, a subtle thread of curiosity that keeps pulling him forward along the hedge. And then something soft catches his eye, a flower head drooping slightly over a cluster of long grass. Inside it, nestled deep within the folds of petals, something small is resting, a bumblebee. It's completely still. At first, it is easy to assume it is lifeless, but a closer look reveals the truth. It's simply sleeping. Bumblebees do this when temperatures drop and night begins to settle. They find shelter wherever they can, inside flowers, beneath leaves, or tucked into sheltered stems, and remain motionless until warmth returns. The hedgehog watches for a moment. There is no instinct to disturb it, only a quiet acknowledgement of another life paused in the same evening. The countryside, in these moments, feels layered with different kinds of sleep. Some creatures burrow, some perch, and some, like the hedgehog, continue to move through it all. He continues along the hedgerow. The air grows cooler now, not cold, just noticeably lighter against the skin, or in his case, the spines. The scent of damp earth becomes more pronounced. Dew is beginning to form, though not yet fully settled. A few steps later, the hedgehog hears a sudden rustle. Not loud, not alarming, just quick. He pauses instinctively. The grass ahead bends slightly, and then a small shape emerges into view. A rabbit. It is young, cautious, and only briefly visible before it slips back into the long grass with practiced ease. Rabbits are creatures of hesitation and speed. They rarely linger in open spaces for long, especially as night approaches. The hedgehog watches the place where it disappeared for a moment, then continues. There is no pursuit, no tension, just passing awareness. The hedgerow now begins to feel more like a corridor than a boundary. It connects places, fields, gardens, small patches of woodland, all stitched together by plant life that has grown and intertwined over years, sometimes decades. This is why hedgerows are so important in the English countryside. They are not simply lines of bushes dividing land. They're living pathways, shelter for movement, highways for life. Foxes travel them, hedgehogs rely on them. Birds nest within them, insects feed and rest within them. Even the soil beneath them is richer, held together by roots that bind and protect it from erosion. As the hedgehog moves deeper into this living corridor, the sounds of the wider countryside begin to shift. The distant lowing of cattle fades. The last remnants of daytime activity disappear entirely. What remains is the night itself, soft chirps of insects, occasional wing beats overhead, the whisper of wind through layered branches, and the steady, unhurried rhythm of a small creature continuing its journey along a familiar yet ever-changing path. The hedgehog pauses one final time. The hedgerow bends again, disappearing into a darker section where trees begin to gather more closely together. Something about it feels slightly different from what he has passed so far. Not dangerous, not unfamiliar in a frightening way, just less known. The hedgehog leaves the hedgerow behind and steps into the open meadow, where the world immediately feels wider and less contained, as though the land itself has gently opened out after being partially folded for much of the day. The change is subtle at first. There is no clear moment where one environment ends and another begins. Instead, it feels like a gradual softening of structure, with the hedge no longer close at his side and the grass spreading out in front of him in slow, uneven waves. The evening light has also changed while he was traveling. The warm gold that lingered earlier is now thinner and more diluted, fading into a soft amber along the horizon. Above that, pale blue takes over, already beginning its slow transition into night. If you were standing here, you might notice how easily your attention would begin to slow without you trying to make it happen. There is something about open space at dusk that encourages stillness in a natural way, as if the world itself is lowering its pace. The hedgehog pauses at the edge of the meadow. He listens. The first crickets have already begun, though not all at once. One starts, then another joins, and gradually the sound builds into a steady background presence. It does not demand attention, but it fills the space in a way that feels complete. Hedgehogs don't respond to sound in the way humans do. They don't interpret it as music or meaning. Instead, it becomes part of the environment, just like scent or temperature. For this hedgehog, the cricket song is simply another sign that night is beginning. He steps forward into the grass. Each movement is slow and deliberate. The stems part gently around him and then settle back after he passes. The ground here is softer than beneath the hedge, still holding the warmth of the day, but already beginning to cool. Above him, the first bats appear. At first, they are difficult to distinguish from the fading light. Only small movements across the sky give them away, quick and precise, like flickers that vanish almost as soon as they are noticed. If you focus on them for too long, they seem to disappear entirely, only to reappear somewhere else a moment later. The hedgehog doesn't look up for long. The sky is not where his attention stays. Instead, he continues forward, guided by scent and the subtle layout of the meadow. Wildflowers are scattered throughout the grass. Many are beginning to close for the night. Their petals fold inward slowly, not all at once, but in stages that reflect their natural rhythm. Others remain open for a little longer, as though reluctant to release the last warmth they have absorbed during the day. Somewhere in the grass, something small shifts, a faint movement, not loud enough to draw alarm, but enough to be noticed as part of the meadow's quiet activity. Life continues here even when it is not visible. The hedgehog moves deeper into the field, where the grass grows slightly taller. It brushes softly against his sides as he passes, leaving a faint trace of moisture and plant scent on his spines. This is when he notices something unusual. The scent changes slightly, not sharply, not suddenly, but enough to stand apart from the natural layering of earth, grass, and insects. It is a scent that does not belong fully to the meadow. He slows his pace. The source becomes clearer as he moves forward. Ahead, partially hidden where the grass has grown around it, there is a small object resting on the ground. It's a tin. It is old, weathered, and slightly dented on one side. The surface has lost any shine it might once have had, softened now by time and exposure to the elements. The lid is partly open, and the edges are dull, no longer sharp or reflective. If you were standing here, you might notice how your attention naturally narrows when something human-made appears in a natural setting. It draws focus in a way that contrasts with everything around it, even when it is small or unremarkable. The hedgehog approaches carefully, but not because he recognizes it as dangerous. Rather, it simply does not belong to the pattern of scent and texture that defines the meadow. He sniffs the edge of the tin. Inside, there is nothing left. Whatever it once contained has long since been removed or dissolved by time and weather. There is only the faintest trace of something sweet, barely detectable, like a memory that has almost disappeared. The hedgehog quickly loses interest. There is nothing here that connects to food or shelter, and so it no longer holds relevance for him. He moves away again, leaving the tin behind. The object remains still in the grass. No movement disturbs it. The meadow does not react to it in any noticeable way. Instead, it slowly begins to reclaim it, with grass leaning gently back around its edges. Above, the sky continues its transformation into night. The amber at the horizon fades further, thinning into a soft glow that barely touches the land now. The blue above deepens into indigo, and the first stars begin to appear more clearly, scattered unevenly across the sky. They do not arrive all at once. Instead, they seem to reveal themselves gradually, as if waiting for the right moment to be seen. The hedgehog continues walking. The meadow feels different now compared to when he first entered it. Not because it's changed dramatically, but because everything within it has become quieter in its own way. The crickets remain steady, forming a continuous background sound that doesn't shift or break. The wind moves through the grass in gentle waves that rise and fall without pattern. Even the bats overhead are less noticeable now, appearing less frequently as night settles deeper. The hedgehog reaches a slight rise in the meadow, where the ground lifts gently and offers a wider view of the landscape beyond. From here, the meadow stretches further than it first appeared, extending into darker areas where the grass blends into shadow and the boundary between land and night becomes less distinct. He pauses again. The hedgehog is not thinking about where he is going next. He's simply present in the space he is in. Above him, the sky is now fully night. Stars are more numerous, though still scattered unevenly, and the air carries a slight coolness that has replaced the warmth of the day entirely. A breeze passes through the meadow once more, moving across the grass in a slow, rolling wave. It bends the stems gently before moving on, leaving everything exactly as it was. The hedgehog remains still for a moment longer, then continues forward into the deeper part of the meadow, where the night feels fully settled and complete. And as he moves, everything around him continues in quiet balance, unchanged in urgency, unchanged in pace, simply existing as night continues to unfold. The hedgehog leaves the meadow behind as the night deepens further, and the land begins to change again in subtle ways that are easier to feel than to describe. The grass grows less even here. The ground becomes slightly cooler and firmer in places, with small dips where water has shaped the earth over time. There is a sense that the land is gently guiding movement now, not through force, but through quiet suggestion. Ahead, there is sound. Not loud, not sudden, just steady. A soft, continuous presence that becomes clearer with each step forward. Water. The hedgehog does not hurry toward it. There is no urgency in his movement. Instead, he follows the gradual increase in sound, the way living things often follow something they recognize before they fully understand it. As he moves closer, the sound resolves into a small stream. It is not wide or powerful. It doesn't rush or crash. Instead, it moves slowly across the landscape, tracing a path that has likely existed for many years, perhaps long before any of the fields around it were shaped into their current form. If you were here, standing quietly at the edge of the water, you might notice how your attention naturally begins to settle. Water has that effect. It draws awareness without asking for it, smoothing out thoughts in a way that feels almost automatic. The hedgehog reaches the bank and pauses. The stream is narrow enough that it can be seen from one side to the other without effort. Its surface shifts constantly, reflecting what little light remains in the sky, which now holds only the faintest trace of blue merging fully into night. Moonlight is beginning to appear, though it is not yet bright. It rests on the water in broken shapes, scattered and reformed with every small movement of the current. The hedgehog lowers his head and sniffs. The air here is different, cooler and damp, carrying a clean, mineral scent that replaces the heavier earth and grass of the meadow. It's the kind of smell that comes from moving water and shaded stones, from places where sunlight reaches only for part of the day. He steps closer to the edge. The ground is softer here, slightly muddy in places where the water has overflowed during earlier rains. Tiny impressions in the soil show where other animals have come to drink or pass through during the night. Hedgehogs are not swimmers, but they are capable of crossing shallow water if needed. Still, there is no need for that tonight. The stream is something to follow, not something to cross. A gentle breeze moves through the reeds along the bank. They bend slowly, almost silently, responding to the air in a way that feels synchronized with the water itself. If you were watching them, you might notice how they seem to echo the movement of the stream, as though both water and plant are part of the same system of motion. The hedgehog begins to walk along the edge of the stream. Each step is careful, but not cautious. There is a difference between the two, and here it feels important. Caution implies fear or uncertainty. Carefulness is simply attention. The sound of the water becomes more layered as he moves. In some places it trickles gently over stones. In others, it gathers slightly before continuing on its way. It never stops, but it also never rushes. It simply continues. This continuity is part of what makes streams so calming, even to animals that don't consciously think about calmness at all. The hedgehog doesn't interpret it in emotional terms. He simply moves alongside it, as though it is a companion rather than a feature of the landscape. Above the stream, the air feels slightly cooler than the meadow. If you were here, you might notice how that cooler air seems to settle differently around your awareness, encouraging stillness without asking for it directly. The body naturally adjusts to it, just as the hedgehog adjusts without thought. A faint movement appears near the water's edge. Something small slips beneath the surface and disappears again almost immediately. A water vole. It is only seen for a moment, but its presence is enough to suggest the quiet complexity of life in and around the stream. Water voles are most active at night, moving along riverbanks and feeding on grasses close to the water. They're shy creatures, often only noticed through brief glimpses or the ripples they leave behind. The hedgehog pauses but doesn't pursue or react strongly. It is simply another part of the environment. He continues along the bank. The stream widens slightly here, forming a small bend where the water slows for a moment before continuing onward. In this bend, the surface is smoother and the reflection of the sky becomes more visible. Moonlight rests here in a soft, uneven pattern. It doesn't shine in the sharp way that sunlight does. Instead, it spreads gently across the surface, shifting whenever the water moves. If you were standing here, you might find yourself watching it without intending to focus on it. There is something about water at night that encourages attention to soften, to drift slightly without losing awareness completely. The hedgehog stops near a patch of stones along the bank. They're partially submerged, rounded by time and water movement. Each one carries a slightly different shape, but all of them share the same smoothness that comes from long exposure to flowing water. He sniffs around them briefly. There are traces of other animals here, faint scents carried in from the meadow and the hedgerow upstream. Everything eventually comes to the water in some form, even if only briefly. The hedgehog moves on again. As he does, the sound of the stream becomes slightly more prominent in the absence of other competing sounds. The crickets from the meadow are now distant. The bats are no longer visible overhead. Even the wind seems to have slowed in this part of the landscape. What remains is mostly water and breath, flow and stillness together. There is a section where the stream runs closer to the roots of a tree that leans slightly over the bank. Its branches extend outward, forming a loose canopy above the water. Leaves hang quietly, barely moving, as though resting in place rather than actively responding to wind. If you were here, you might notice how the presence of trees near water changes the feeling of space. It becomes more enclosed, but not in a restrictive way. Instead, it feels like entering a softer boundary where the world narrows just enough to become easier to focus on. The hedgehog pauses beneath this overhanging tree. For a moment, everything feels slightly more contained. The water, the leaves, the faint movement of insects near the bank. Even the air itself seems to hold stillness more easily here. Then, something subtle draws his attention again. Not movement this time, but shape. A small object rests partially in the shallows near the edge of the stream. It is not natural. The hedgehog approaches slowly. It is another human thing, a fragment of fabric caught on a stone, half submerged in the water. It's faded, softened by time and exposure. Its edges frayed where it has been pulled by the current over and over again, without fully moving away. If you were standing here, you might notice how water changes human objects over time, how it removes sharpness, softens color, reduces definition until what remains is only suggestion. The hedgehog sniffs at it briefly. There is no scent of food or relevance to him, only the faint trace of human presence, diluted and distant. He quickly loses interest and steps away. The stream continues to move around the object without acknowledging it. Water doesn't stop for interruption. It simply flows around what does not belong, continuing its path as it always has. The hedgehog continues walking along the bank. The night is deeper now. The sky above is fully dark, and the stars are more clearly visible, scattered across the sky in uneven patterns that feel natural and unplanned. The moon is brighter now, though still gentle in its presence. If you were here, you might notice how even the act of looking upward begins to feel slower at this stage of the night, as though the body itself understands that there is no need to rush attention. The hedgehog pauses one final time along the stream. The sound of water surrounds everything now, steady and uninterrupted. For a moment, there is nothing else to focus on. Just movement, just flow, just the quiet continuation of water moving through land that has learned to shape itself around it. And then, without urgency or decision, the hedgehog continues onward, leaving the stream behind but carrying its sound with him into the deeper parts of the night. The hedgehog leaves the stream behind and continues onward into the deeper countryside, where the land begins to change once again in a way that feels gradual rather than sudden, as though the world is simply easing into a different version of itself. The sound of water slowly fades as he moves away, not disappearing all at once, but thinning out until it becomes part of memory rather than immediate experience. In its place, a quieter kind of night settles in, one that feels more enclosed and still, as if the air itself has thickened slightly with calm. If you were here now, standing in this part of the countryside, you might notice how the temperature feels just right for stillness, not too warm and not too cool, but balanced in a way that makes it easier to simply exist without adjusting or reacting. The hedgehog does not think about temperature. He simply moves forward. Soon, the outline of an orchard begins to appear ahead, its trees standing in loose rows that are not perfectly ordered, but still clearly shaped by human hands long ago. Time has softened their arrangement now, allowing grass to grow freely between them and branches to spread in slightly irregular directions. This is an old orchard. The the kind that has been left to quiet itself over time, where human presence is no longer active, but still faintly remembered in structure and spacing. As the hedgehog enters, the air feels subtly different again. There is a softness here that comes from trees holding warmth during the day and releasing it slowly at night. You can almost feel that gentle warmth mixing with the cooler air around it, creating a balanced stillness that sits comfortably against the skin, even if you are only imagining it. The grass beneath the trees is slightly uneven, and the hedgehog moves carefully through it, passing between roots and fallen leaves that have gathered in small clusters around the base of each trunk. Above him, branches stretch outward in quiet arcs, and within them, leaves shift gently in the faint breeze, producing a sound that is soft and irregular, like breathing that is barely noticeable unless you pay close attention to it. Somewhere deeper in the orchard, a moth drifts through the air. It moves without urgency, guided more by instinct than direction, weaving through the space between branches and moonlight. If you were watching it, you might notice how it seems unaffected by time, as though it belongs to a slower rhythm than everything else around it. The hedgehog pauses briefly beneath one of the trees. The ground here is scattered with fallen apples. They lie in various stages of softness, some still firm enough to hold shape, others beginning to sink slightly into the earth where they have rested for longer. The scent is faint but noticeable, a mix of sweetness and fermentation that blends into the overall atmosphere of the orchard. He sniffs at one briefly, but there is nothing that draws his attention for long. Hedgehogs are opportunistic feeders, but tonight there is no urgency in seeking food. Everything feels slower, as though even instinct has softened slightly in this environment. If you were here, you might notice how easy it is to stand still in a place like this, how the orchard seems to encourage a slower rhythm of thought, where attention can drift without needing to hold on to anything in particular. The hedgehog continues moving between the trees. Above him, leaves rustle gently in the breeze, creating a sound that repeats in soft variations, never quite identical, but always familiar enough to feel steady. It is the kind of sound that does not interrupt silence, but becomes part of it. Occasionally, a distant owl call drifts through the orchard. It is not close, and it does not repeat immediately. Instead, it arrives once, then fades into the night air, leaving behind a sense of space that feels slightly wider than before. The hedgehog pauses again, lifting his head briefly as he listens. Then he continues. As he moves deeper into the orchard, the arrangement of trees becomes slightly less regular, as though the outer edges are slowly being reclaimed by the surrounding countryside. Grass grows taller here, and the ground feels less shaped by human presence and more shaped by natural growth over time. The hedgehog passes another cluster of fallen apples. Some have been partially eaten by insects, others remain untouched. A few are simply resting where they fell, slowly becoming part of the ground again. There is a quiet sense of continuity here, as though nothing in the orchard is truly separate from anything else, only in different stages of the same slow cycle. Above, the moon has risen higher now. Its light is gentle rather than bright, spreading across the orchard in soft layers that shift as branches move slightly in the breeze. Shadows form and dissolve slowly, never sharp, always soft at the edges. If you were here, you might feel that same softness in the air itself, as though even space around you has become less rigid, more open, more forgiving. The hedgehog moves through a narrow gap between two trees, where the ground dips slightly and the grass grows thicker. Here the scent of apples is stronger, and the air feels a little cooler as it settles in the lower part of the orchard. He pauses again, not because anything has changed suddenly, but because stillness feels natural here, as though the orchard itself encourages pauses rather than movement. A moth passes close by, drifting near the hedgehog before disappearing into the darkness between branches. Its movement is so quiet and unhurried that it feels almost like part of the air rather than something moving through it. In the distance, another owl call is heard. Again, it does not repeat immediately. It simply exists for a moment, then fades, leaving silence that feels fuller rather than empty. The hedgehog continues onward. By now, the orchard feels deeper, quieter, and more enclosed, as though the trees have gently drawn closer together without actually moving. The air here feels still enough that even small movements seem meaningful. If you were here, you might notice how your breathing naturally slows in a place like this, not because it is instructed to, but because the environment itself seems to invite it. The hedgehog passes beneath a particularly low branch where leaves hang close to the ground, brushing lightly against his spines as he moves through them. The sensation is soft and barely noticeable, yet it adds to the overall feeling of gentle contact between animal and environment. The orchard begins to thin slightly, suggesting an opening beyond the trees. But for now, the hedgehog does not rush toward it. There is no need to hurry. Everything here moves at its own pace, and the orchard continues to exist in quiet balance around him, with fallen apples resting where they landed, moths drifting through moonlight, and leaves shifting softly overhead in the night air. As he moves further through it, the feeling of calm continues to deepen, spreading gently through the space like a slow exhale that does not end. The hedgehog leaves the orchard behind, and as he does, the character of the night shifts once again in a way that is gradual enough to almost go unnoticed at first, as though the landscape itself is gently transitioning from one state of calm into another. The air feels slightly different here, not colder, not warmer, but heavier in a soft grounding way that often appears near woodland edges, where trees begin to gather more closely together, and the open space of fields gives way to the more enclosed presence of roots, trunks, and layered foliage. If you were standing here, just beyond the orchard's final trees, you might notice how your attention naturally begins to slow in response to that change, without needing to make any conscious effort, as though the environment itself is encouraging stillness in a very quiet, steady way. The hedgehog pauses at the boundary between orchard and woodland. Up ahead of him, the land becomes less open and more textured. The ground is no longer simply grass and scattered apples, but a mixture of roots, fallen leaves, and soft earth that has been shaped over time by both growth and decay. This is the woodland edge, a place that is not fully one thing or another, but something in between. A transition zone where the orchard's gentle order begins to dissolve into the deeper, more layered complexity of wild woodland. The hedgehog steps forward carefully, though not with hesitation, more with awareness. His movements remain slow and steady, each step placing him further into a space that feels increasingly enclosed, but not in any way that suggests confinement. Instead, it feels like entering a softer kind of quiet. Above him, trees begin to appear more frequently. Their trunks rise upward into darkness that is now fully established, with branches spreading out overhead in irregular patterns that shift gently with the breeze. The leaves move in soft clusters, creating a sound that is subtle and irregular, like a breath that is shared across many small surfaces at once. The hedgehog moves further along the woodland edge. The ground becomes slightly uneven now, with small rises and dips shaped by roots that run just beneath the surface. Some roots are exposed, twisting across the soil like quiet pathways of their own, while others remain hidden beneath layers of leaf litter that have built up over time. The smell here is different as well. Damp earth becomes more noticeable, mixed with the faint scent of moss and decomposing leaves, a natural cycle that is always present in woodland environments, but becomes especially noticeable at night when other scents have faded. The hedgehog pauses briefly to sniff the air. Everything here is layered. Nothing is isolated. Each scent blends into another, forming a kind of continuous impression rather than distinct signals. A soft rustle moves through the undergrowth nearby, not close enough to alarm, but close enough to suggest life continuing just beyond immediate sight. Woodland edges are full of such presence, creatures moving between open and enclosed spaces, never fully revealing themselves unless necessary. The hedgehog continues onward. As he moves, the texture of the ground shifts again. Moss begins to appear in patches, soft and slightly damp beneath his feet. It spreads across stones and roots, covering them in a gentle green layer that feels almost like a natural cushion within the landscape. If you were standing here, you might notice how that softness changes the feeling of each step you take, making movement itself feel quieter, less defined, as though the ground is absorbing part of the motion before it can fully register. The hedgehog passes beneath a low branch where leaves hang closer to the ground. They brush lightly against his spines as he moves through them, not disturbing him, but marking his passage in the smallest possible way. Up ahead, the woodland begins to deepen slightly. The trees grow closer together now, and the open gaps between them become fewer. Light is no longer something that spreads freely here, but something that filters down in faint scattered layers from above, softened by leaves and branches that have gathered over time. In this deeper section of the woodland edge, the sense of night becomes more complete, not darker in a sudden way, but more fully present, more settled. The hedgehog pauses again. There is a sense here of everything slowing further, not because anything is changing dramatically, but because the environment itself encourages less movement and more presence. Somewhere in the distance, a faint owl call drifts through the trees. It is not close, and it does not repeat immediately. It simply arrives, then fades, leaving behind a sense of space that feels slightly larger than before. The hedgehog moves again, slowly following the contour of the woodland edge. And as he does, the sense of separation between individual elements of the landscape begins to soften. The trees, the ground, the air, and even the movement of small unseen creatures all feel like parts of a single continuous presence rather than separate things happening independently. This is one of the quiet effects of woodland at night. Everything begins to feel connected without needing to be observed closely. A faint movement catches the hedgehog's attention near the base of a fallen log. He pauses, sniffs, and finds traces of another small animal that passed through earlier, though it is no longer present. Only the faint impression remains in scent and disturbed leaf litter. He does not investigate further. There is no need. The woodland holds many such passing moments, and not all of them require attention. He continues onward. As he moves, the air feels slightly cooler now, not in a sharp or uncomfortable way, but in the gentle, natural cooling that occurs when the ground has fully released the warmth of the day and the night has settled into its deeper phase. If you were here, you might notice how that cooler air seems to rest more easily against the skin, encouraging stillness without effort, as though the body itself begins to match the slower rhythm of the environment. The hedgehog passes over another patch of moss-covered roots. They are thicker here, forming natural ridges across the ground that shape his path gently without forcing direction. Movement becomes more guided than chosen, as though the woodland edge is subtly leading him forward. Above, the canopy becomes denser. Leaves overlap in layers, reducing the amount of visible sky, though occasional gaps still reveal small patches of stars, distant and steady above the moving branches. The hedgehog pauses once more. In this moment, everything feels slightly suspended. The movement of leaves, the faint sounds of insects, the distant presence of other nocturnal life. All of it continues, but in a way that feels softened, almost distant. as though the woodland has gently slowed its own perception of time. The hedgehog remains still for a moment longer. Then, without hesitation, he continues deeper along the woodland edge, where the night feels fully established, and the world beyond it becomes quieter with each passing step. And as he moves forward, the woodland continues to settle around him in layers of calm presence and slow, continuous stillness that does not end, but simply deepens. The hedgehog moves away from the deeper woodland edge, and as he does, the world begins to feel slightly more familiar again, as though the landscape is gently turning back on itself and retracing its own steps. There is no clear moment where the change happens. Instead, it unfolds slowly in subtle shifts of space and sound, like a memory becoming clearer without being actively recalled. The dense presence of trees begins to thin. The layered canopy overhead opens in small, irregular gaps. And through those gaps, faint pieces of the night sky become visible again, steady and unchanged, quietly holding their place above everything below. If you were here, you might notice how movement feels slightly easier now, not because anything has become faster or lighter, but because the environment is less enclosed than it was a short while ago. The woodland edge releases its hold gradually, allowing space to open again in front of each step. The hedgehog does not hurry. There is no need to hurry. Instead, he simply begins to retrace parts of the path he has already taken, moving back through the landscape in a way that feels natural rather than deliberate. This is something hedgehogs often do during their nightly journeys. They rarely move in straight lines or fixed directions. Instead, they explore, loop back, and revisit familiar areas as they move through hedgerows, fields, and woodland edges. Their world is not a journey from one place to another. It is a slow weaving through spaces they know, and rediscovering them in slightly different states each time. Up ahead, the woodland begins to resemble the orchard again in its outermost edges, where trees become less tightly packed, and the ground beneath them starts to soften into grass instead of dense leaf litter. The hedgehog pauses briefly. The air here feels slightly different again. Still cool, still calm, but less dense than within the deeper woodland. It carries a faint openness that suggests wider space beyond the trees, even before that space is fully visible. He continues forward, and gradually, the orchard comes back into view. At first, it appears as scattered silhouettes between trees, then slowly becomes more defined as rows of trunks and low branches re-emerge in the landscape. The hedgehog steps into the orchard again. This return feels different from the first time he entered it earlier in the night. Then, it was new, filled with quiet curiosity and gentle exploration. Now, it feels familiar, as though the space has already been understood once and is now being revisited in a softer way. The air in the orchard is still and balanced. If you were standing here, you might notice how easy it would be to simply remain still for a moment, without feeling the need to move or adjust anything. The temperature feels settled, not changing in any noticeable direction, as though the night has reached a point of steady calm. The hedgehog passes beneath the same trees he crossed earlier. Fallen apples are still scattered across the ground, though some have shifted slightly since he last passed them. A few have been disturbed by small animals moving through during the night. Others remain exactly where they were, slowly becoming part of the soil again. He sniffs briefly at one as he passes, but there is no urgency now, no need to explore further. Everything here feels already known, already understood in the quiet way that nighttime familiarity develops. Above, the branches move gently in the breeze. Leaves rustle softly, creating the same steady, irregular sound that was present before, though now it feels more like repetition than discovery. Familiar sounds often take on this quality. When they are revisited, they become anchors rather than new impressions. The hedgehog continues through the orchard, moving toward its outer edge. Beyond it, the meadow begins to reappear. At first, it is just an opening between trees, a faint widening of space that gradually grows larger as the orchard thins and gives way once again to open grassland. The transition feels gentle and unforced, as though the landscape is simply unfolding in reverse. The hedgehog steps into the meadow again. It's the same meadow he crossed earlier in the night, but now it feels quieter, more settled, as though it too has moved further into its own nighttime rhythm. The grass is still moving in soft waves under the breeze, but there is less variation in sound and movement than before. Everything feels more consistent, more unified, as though the meadow has fully accepted the night. Shapes remain the same, but their presence feels softer, less defined, as though edges are gently blurred by time and stillness. The hedgehog moves slowly across the meadow, retracing a path that is not exactly the same as before, but close enough that it carries a sense of recognition. Crickets continue their steady background rhythm. The sound is unchanged, but now it feels more like continuity than change, as though it has been present the entire time and will continue long after anything else has shifted. Above, the bats are less noticeable now. Their movements still occur, but they are no longer drawing attention in the same way. Instead, they blend into the broader sense of night activity, part of a system that no longer needs to be observed closely to be understood. The hedgehog continues toward the hedgerow. As he approaches it, the structure becomes familiar again, the dense interwoven branches of hawthorn and blackthorn forming a natural boundary between field and field, between open space and sheltered paths. He pauses at the edge. The hedgerow feels like a reference point in the landscape, something that has remained consistent throughout the night even as everything else has been visited and left behind. If you were standing here, you might notice how comforting it feels when familiar structures reappear in a space that has been explored widely. There is a quiet reassurance in returning to something that was already known earlier. The hedgehog enters the hedgerow. The passage through it feels slower now, not because anything has changed physically, but because the mind, in a way, has already experienced it once before. The sounds are the same, the rustle of leaves, the soft movement of grass, the distant, steady presence of night insects continuing their quiet work. But now, everything feels more settled, as though it no longer needs to be examined or understood. The hedgehog moves along the familiar hedge line, and as he does, earlier parts of the night begin to reappear in reverse order, not as separate events, but as overlapping impressions. The meadow behind him, the orchard beyond that, the stream further still, each one now existing as part of a continuous memory of movement through the landscape. The hedgehog does not pause long in any of these places now. He simply passes through them, returning, retracing, moving gently back toward where the night began. If you were here, you might notice how repetition begins to feel soothing at this stage, how familiar sights and sounds lose their need for attention, and instead become part of a continuous background presence that supports stillness rather than interrupts it. The hedgehog eventually reaches the familiar stretch of countryside near where his journey began. The fields are quieter now than before, though not significantly different. The main change is in perception. Everything feels more familiar, more settled, more gently understood. He moves toward the hawthorn hedge where his nest lies hidden beneath branches and leaves. The same hedge from earlier in the night now appears again, unchanged, steady, and quietly waiting. The hedgehog slows as he approaches it. There is no urgency in the return, only completion. He moves beneath the branches into the sheltered space where leaves and twigs form his nest. It is exactly as he left it. Still, safe, familiar. The hedgehog pauses inside for a moment, allowing the sounds of the countryside to continue beyond him, while the space around him becomes smaller, softer, and more enclosed. The hedgehog curls slightly within his nest. The night continues outside. But here, beneath the hawthorn hedge, everything slows, everything quiets, and the journey gently comes to rest where it began. The hedgehog is back beneath the hawthorn hedge. This is where the night began, although it does not feel like a beginning anymore. It feels more like a return to something steady, something quietly waiting, as though the whole countryside has slowly circled back into itself and settled here once again. The nest is small, hidden carefully beneath layers of dry leaves, twigs, and softened earth that has been shaped gradually over time by repeated use. It is not built in the human sense of construction, but formed instead through repetition, through the simple act of returning to the same sheltered space again and again until the land itself begins to remember. The hedgehog moves inside it slowly. There is no urgency now, no searching, no wandering, only settling. The dry leaves shift slightly as he enters, producing a soft crackling sound that is immediately absorbed into the surrounding stillness. The nest responds gently, not resisting, but adjusting in small ways to his presence, as though it was always expecting this return. If you were here, very quietly and without movement, you might notice how the ground beneath such a nest feels different from open countryside. Softer, more contained, a small pocket of stillness held within the wider landscape. The hedgehog turns once, then again, and slowly he curls into a resting shape within the leaves. Above him, the hawthorn branches remain still, forming a low protective canopy that filters the night air into softer currents before it reaches the ground. The leaves overhead move only slightly, responding to a breeze that has now become extremely gentle, almost imperceptible. The sounds of the countryside continue beyond the hedge, but they are further away now, less defined than before. Crickets still sing, though their rhythm feels more distant. The occasional movement of grass in the fields beyond continues, but without drawing attention. Even the wind seems to have softened into a quieter version of itself. Everything is still happening, but nothing feels close anymore. The hedgehog remains curled in his nest. His breathing slows, not suddenly, not noticeably, but gradually, in the way all living things ease toward rest when there's no longer anywhere they need to go. The dry leaves beneath him hold warmth from earlier in the night, and that warmth lingers faintly, creating a small pocket of comfort against the cooling air. If you were here, you might notice how easily the idea of warmth becomes something you can almost feel, even without touch. How the memory of it is enough to soften awareness slightly. Above, the sky continues its quiet work. Stars remain scattered across it, steady and unchanged, while the moon holds its position with calm consistency. There is no movement in the sky that requires attention now, only presence. The hedgehog shifts once more, then becomes still again. Around him, the hedge remains unchanged, as it always has been. A few insects move faintly within the leaves, but even these small sounds feel reduced now, as though they are participating in the same slowing rhythm as everything else. One by one, the places visited earlier in the night begin to feel more distant. The meadow, with its wide open grass and soft waves of movement. The orchard, with its fallen apples and quiet moths drifting between branches. The stream, with its steady water flowing endlessly through the land. The woodland edge, with its moss-covered roots and layered stillness. Each place remains, but none of them feel immediate anymore. They exist now more as impressions than active experiences, gently fading into the background of memory. The hedgehog is no longer moving through them. He is simply here, resting, still. The nest of leaves holds him gently, without pressure, without demand. If you were here now, listening very quietly, you might notice how sound itself seems to soften further at this point in the night, how even silence begins to feel thicker, more complete, as though it has gathered itself together into something whole. The countryside continues beyond the hedge, but it feels farther away now, less detailed, less defined, more like a presence than a place. A soft rustle passes through distant grass, then fades again. An owl calls once in the far distance and does not repeat. A final movement of leaves occurs somewhere above, then settles, and after each sound there is a slightly longer pause of quiet. The hedgehog remains curled in his nest. His body is still now, completely still in the way that resting animals become when they are no longer attending to the world around them. There is no need for movement, no need for awareness of anything beyond the softness of the space he occupies. If you were here, you might notice how easy it is to imagine that stillness spreading outward from this small place, slowly reaching into the surrounding hedge, then the fields beyond, then further still into the wider countryside. Not as something that happens quickly, but as something that gently continues. The night deepens again, though it does so almost imperceptibly. There is no clear shift, only a gradual softening of everything that remains. The hedgehog breathes slowly, each cycle steady and unchanging. The leaves beneath him do not move. The hedge above does not move. Even the air feels settled now, as though it has found its resting shape. If you were here, you might find that your awareness begins to drift slightly at this point, not toward anything in particular, but simply away from sharp focus into a more diffuse sense of being present without needing to hold on to anything. The countryside continues its quiet rhythm outside the nest, but even that rhythm feels reduced now, softened into background presence that no longer draws attention. The hedgehog is asleep, not gradually becoming asleep, but fully settled into it, curled within the nest of leaves beneath the hawthorn hedge, held gently by earth and plant and night. The world around him continues, but only faintly. Crickets, now distant, wind, now almost still. Stars above, steady and unchanged. And everything, slowly, gently, quietly rests, and stays resting, and continues resting, until even that idea begins to soften. And there is only night, only stillness, only the countryside sleeping beneath the stars,